consciousness is universal, if everything is made of consciousness, then how do we make sense of the brain? How do we relate to that concept from the perspective of consciousness being fundamental? That's what I thought we'd dig deeper in this episode. And it's not about claiming to have the answer. It's not about persuading you. It's about exploring. I share my perspective on the topic, and you are warmly welcome to share your thoughts, your experiences in the comment sections. And if you're new to my channel, then my name is Josephine. Warmly welcome on board. And if you're a regular viewer, then let's dig right into it. The non-dual understanding suggests that consciousness is fundamental and that the world and we arise out of consciousness. If we were to explore that perspective, how do we make sense of the brain? We can't discard everything we've seen in neuroscience and all the other findings we have in science. And actually, we don't have to. Or that's been my journey of trying to map out, if consciousness is fundamental, how do I relate to my understanding of the world? So many of us in this society have been taught that consciousness arises outside of the brain, but no one can really explain how it's done. But I guess the common understanding is that our neurons are interacting with each other and sending neurotransmitters to each other. And then somewhere along the way, our consciousness arises out of that. And then we have taken for proof that what we've learned about the brain, the fact that you can open up someone's skull and you see a physical brain there, and the fact that we can measure brain activity measuring electrical activity inside the brain. We can measure that from the outside. And the fact that we started to map a lot of neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, a lot of little molecules going back and forth, and changing the ratio of those molecules have an impact on how we feel, how we perceive the world. And if we send electrical impulses into the brain, it alters how we feel. So it's easy to make the conclusion that consciousness arises out of the brain. But I'd like to suggest that there's a gap there. The only thing we have shown is that there's a correlation, and correlation doesn't mean causation. And what does that mean? Well, it's this classical example of it's correlated that the sale of ice cream goes up during the summer months. So there's a correlation. Ice cream sales go up and the weather is warm. But then the causation depends on which thing is causing what. And there you could say, well, if we sell a lot of ice cream, then the weather becomes warm. Or you could say the weather becomes warm, that's why we sell more ice cream. And what we have proven with observing the brain is a correlation. When we feel certain states or when we think about certain states, there is things happening that's observable in the brain. There's a correlation, but causation? No, that has not been proven. And that opens up for both scenarios, actually, that activity in the brain causes different kind of emotional states, such as seeing the color red or feeling happy or feeling angry. Or you could also say that feeling angry, that's how that looks like in the brain. So it can go either way. And what I like to explore here is the path that says that the brain is what conscious activity looks like when observed from the outside. And I recently did an episode as well that's called What's the Body? And if you want to watch that episode, I'll put a link up here somewhere. And that basically explores how we can relate to the body from a consciousness-only model. But one thing that usually lingers a bit longer is the relationship with the brain. because we're so used to thinking that consciousness arises outside of the brain, that my consciousness is inside the brain. So that's why I wanted to linger a bit longer on that specific organ of our body. It's basically the same, but for myself and speaking to other people, we usually jump back into assuming that the brain actually exists outside of consciousness. I don't know if you've experienced that for yourself, but it's almost like we can go on a rational tangent and then make a leap and assume that the brain exists. Yeah. Because if we start with thinking that our consciousness sits behind our eyes, then we have already gone into materialism, because we have assumed that there is such a thing as a head and that there is such a thing as eyes in a physical sense, that consciousness can be behind. Because the invitation for non-duality, or the way non-duality understands the world, everything arises inside of consciousness. So there is nothing, as far as we know, outside of consciousness, or it's not needed to make something up that exists outside of consciousness. And I have other videos on that as well. I'll link them here and I'll link them below. So finding it a bit hard where to put the bar here, but let's just start somewhere. You can't include everything in one episode. So let's go back to the brain. Thinking that your consciousness is located behind your eyes, you've already gone one step too far. The first experience we have with ourselves is just awareness, basically. You are aware of different sensations, of thoughts, of emotions. And then when we grow up, we learn that there is something called a brain. You didn't invent a brain by yourself. You didn't look inward and discover that, oh, here's a brain. A brain can only be discovered on the outside. When you go inwards, there is no brain. You have the experience of tasting a strawberry, of remembering a holiday when you were a child. You have the experience of calculating mathematics, of analyzing a board game. All you have on your inner world is experiences. It's qualitative in its nature. You don't go in and find neurons or neurotransmitters or gray matter of the cortex of the brain. You find only qualitative experiences, or qualia. You only find what it is like to be alive. There is no tangible thing when you experience yourself. And actually, there's no tangible things when you experience the world. All your sense perceptions are experiences. Then your brain uses those experiences and make a useful map of the world, and then we call them tangible. But the experience of, let's say, the experience of minus 12 degrees Celsius isn't minus 12 degrees Celsius. It is the experience of coldness. You can feel like a biting sensation in the area that you call your face. But you're not experiencing temperature. You experience a sensation that you can map to a temperature so that we know what we talk about. And when we talk about the brain, there's just another correlation. Like if I'm in a research institute and I start to meditate, they can measure my brain waves. Something is happening. And brain waves is measuring electrical activity. So they can see that what we know about anger is not correlated to Josephine's state of being. So they can see the correlation. So they can get data point on my brain and see what it's likely that I will be feeling. But I don't experience brain waves on the inside. I experience calmness. I experience peace. And when the researchers look at the data points, they see brain waves. Or I can look as well, but I have to go, I have to use my sense perceptions. The inward experience is just emotions and thoughts. Are you with me so long? Are you with me? Yeah. Does that make sense? So that means like the only experience we have of a brain is looking at it from the outside. So in that sense, there's no difference than looking at a brain than it is to look at a concrete wall or like a little rock formation. It's just that I can talk to the brain that I'm looking at. Well, you know what I mean? Like the brain has an inner life. It has an experience. So I can ask this brain of, oh, I noticed that there is now a spark in your the part of your brain that wants to move your arm. Are you internally thinking about moving your arm? Are you sending those impulses? And the person says yes. So we can map those things. And we can map when people are analyzing images with their eyes, because then there's an activity in that area of the brain. But here's the important thing. Language doesn't quite compute. I say in that area of the brain. Actually, in that area that we have mapped out as the brain. But the thing that the person is experiencing isn't an activity in a brain region. It is experiencing looking out at the world. It is getting a sense perceptions in the form of vision. And then you might ask, well, why can we not just draw the conclusion that consciousness comes out of the brain? I mean, we could. Everyone's free to do that. But it's interesting, like, where does the evidence point, and what reason do we have to assume that consciousness arises out of the brain? That's just one of the assumptions. You could also assume that that is what consciousness looks like. And the evidence to support that is that if consciousness arises out of the brain, once the brain is silent, there's no activity going on, there should be no experiences whatsoever. Yeah? Because if consciousness arises out of the brain, there should be no consciousness if the brain isn't active. And that has been disproven. That's research doesn't suggest that. Like, for instance, if pilots that go into these G-forces when they're flying, they go what we call unconscious. You can't contact them anymore. Their brain activity really goes down. And when you interview them afterwards and ask them what it was like, they don't say that they have that nothing happens. They say that they usually have these vivid experiences of colors or almost like a psychedelic journey. So actually their experiences went up when their brain lost blood flow, when there was very, very limited activity in the brain. That doesn't support the evidence that consciousness arises out of brain activity. But if the brain is what consciousness looks like from the outside, it doesn't need to be 100%. There could be conscious activity going on that isn't necessarily seen in the brain. Yeah, let's linger there. Because If you are seeing me from the front, I could do things behind my back that you wouldn't know. So what you see is an indicative of everything that goes on for me. But if I was only this side, everything you could see, I was. So if you didn't see anything, you could be 100% sure that nothing else was going on. So you could say that if I don't see anything, there's nothing going on. But if I'm three-dimensional, then you just looking at me, you can't say for 100% sure that nothing else is going on. And the same with the brain and consciousness. So if the brain goes silent, if consciousness isn't originated from brain activity, there could still be conscious experiences, even though the brain is silent. There's no measurements going from it. And this would also be a way of explaining near-death experiences. Because people who's gone what we would call clinically dead, in the sense that they might have been underwater way too long, they didn't get enough blood oxygen to their head, they come back reporting these marvelous experiences, as though their consciousness merged with the divine. They met other beings. In other words, there was an intense experience for them. Whether it's true or not, we don't even need to go into that. But they had intense experiences. They saw vivid colors. They had conversations. But from the outside, it looks like their brain was silent. You cannot explain that if consciousness arises out of the brain. And same with psychedelic experiences. When you give people like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and you put them and you measure their brain activity, it actually is reduced in every area. And this has been a bit misreported, because you can't say, if you skew the evidence a little bit, that there is an increased communication between different areas in the brain. Yes, percentage-wise, possibly you could say that. But that's just because everything is so silent. So there's not actually more communication going on. It's just percent-wise, because everything else has been silenced. The humming noise, you could say, no, even that's stretching it. But so overall, several studies has shown that the activity goes down. So my experiences should be close to zero. But people taking psychedelics are reporting having the most life-changing experiences. Many report them as being top 10 experiences of their lives. How do you explain that if the brain is quiet? Is this on its own evidence? No, it's not. It's an indication. It's an indication that maybe consciousness does not arise out of the brain. And maybe another interesting topic, or another interesting area is that, okay, so if consciousness is not arising out of the brain, well, then we don't need to study the brain. But that's not at all what I'm suggesting, or that's not at all what I wish for. It's a marvelous way to study consciousness, because it is what consciousness looks like from the outside. And the way we can understand it is just as valuable. Obviously, the neurotransmitters that we see, they correlate with something. If we alter what we see, we're not necessarily altering the brain, we're altering consciousness. Because remember, the brain is a non-existent. It is just not what it's believed to be. It is not physical matter. It's consciousness manifesting in a way that can be picked up by our senses, by our machines. So when you alter the brain, like say for instance, you give people SSRI, which inhibit the serotonin uptake. It's what we call antidepressants, or it's one of the antidepressants. People have changes in the way they experience themselves and the world. That doesn't all of a sudden become invalid just because we understand the brain in a different way. What happened yesterday is going to keep happening tomorrow. We just have a different understanding. We can put our findings into another matrix of understanding. And this is what I meant with that it's easy to slip back into the things actually existing outside of consciousness. Because when you take this drug, SSRI, you're not actually taking pharmaceutical molecules, physical in its sense. They are themselves little bundles of consciousness, although they're not alive. I mean, they don't have an inner life, but they are something. They're not molecules, but whatever they are something. And you put that inside of my dissociative boundary, inside of my localization, and something happens. Now that's interesting. That's still going to be interesting, even though the pill is consciousness and the my brain is conscious, is made of consciousness. Some people like to explain it as though this can be misunderstood, but if it's understood in another way, it's quite interesting. It's almost like the pill is an idea of consciousness, and you put it inside of me, well, something's going to change. The same if I form a new belief, something's going to change. If I all of a sudden see the world in a different way, it's going to change. Yeah. So neuroscience or brain surgery or none of that is going to become obsolete. Because remember, again, we're not changing anything. Either the world was always made of matter and it functions the way it does, or it was always made of consciousness and it's going to keep functioning the way it was. Our understanding of the world does not change what we see. It just changes what we allow ourselves to look at, how we understand the findings that we see. And the thing that I find very fascinating in this is that when you talk about these understanding of the reality, it easily becomes almost like a conflict. Like you have to choose side. Are you on this? Are you in this understanding, or are you in this understanding? But that's just manufactured. How about being in curiosity, of not actually knowing? Like, yeah, they have good arguments here, but these are also good arguments. You don't have to decide. There is no conflict. There is no war going on unless you want it to be. It's an exploration. And we don't have to agree to explore together. We don't have to go into debate as soon as we try to explore a new way. Okay, that was a bit of my opinions coming in, because this can be such sensitive area to traverse when I genuinely don't see why it has to be. We're just trying to see the world as accurately as possible. And challenging the belief that consciousness arises outside of the brain is an opening for all of us. We can explore more, we can learn more. And if in the end we don't find it to be very correct, well, then you believe something else for a while until maybe you change your mind. It doesn't have to become an identity. I'm the person who sees the world like this. No, why would you make that into an identity? Based on the knowledge base you have now, this is how you see the world. Obviously, it's meant to change. It's changed over the history of mankind. And it's meant to evolve during our lifetimes as well. When we were a 5-year-old, we understood the world quite different from how we understand it now. Let's keep evolving like that. And if we go down a wrong bend, then we learn that. Mm. I don't know what this sparks in you, but for me, it sparks curiosity, like a new frontier, a new way of understanding the world. If you have any questions, if something was unclear in the way I talk, then please do share in the comments. This was my first attempt at articulating this particular topic about the brain. And maybe even in my words, I slip back into saying that there is a brain. Because the thing is, there is a brain in the sense that it's a cluster of phenomena that we can talk about. Saying that there is a brain doesn't mean there's a physical brain on the outside. No, it's the appearance of consciousness of this specific localization. Yeah. Thank you for joining me this far. I hope to see you next time. And if you want more of these topics, then don't forget to subscribe.